wanted to talk about technologists specifically. So if we're talking about people in IT, and you mentioned some of them, programmers, network engineers, IT infrastructure, help desk, whatever it is, where do you see, or do you see where they might need help in a specific way that you might not cover in the book, or maybe we can expand on from the book where you covered it slightly, but for technologists, this is really where you could get the biggest bang for the buck, if you will.
Yeah, so I think this is true not just of technologists, but I see it a lot in them. And if you've listened to my podcast, there are two consistent themes that go across all the episodes. Is you have to think about your audience and you have to listen better. Most people come at communication from here is what I want to say. And what's most important is thinking about what does the audience need to hear. So it's not about what you want, it's about what they need. And many technologists, and it's not just technologists, but many technologists seem to forget that. So they will talk too technically. They will use jargon. They will make assumptions that people understand certain ways that things connect that they might not. And so we really need to use a bit of empathy and put our communication in perspective from the audience. What's important to them? So maybe that means you have to scaffold their knowledge. Maybe you have to define some terms. We often think that people know what we do. We all suffer from what's essentially called the curse of knowledge. We know more about the topic than others do. And because of that, we make all these mistakes around using terms that are inappropriate, going too deep too soon. I like to say the only antidote to the curse of knowledge is empathy. You have to put yourself in your audience's perspective to understand what they know, what they don't know, etc. That is quite possibly the biggest mistake most people make, but especially technologists.
So one thing that I've wondered is, as I'm in this industry, I struggle. One of the struggles that I have is the pause while I am trying to formulate an answer. That is exceptionally uncomfortable to me. I'm sure it is I'm sure that's not unique to technologists, but it is one of the reasons I think that I would say probably a lot of us tend to immediately go into talking as opposed to taking that moment to formulate a structure or anything. Do you have any suggestions on how to just be okay with the pause or something along those lines?
Yes. So pausing is really powerful. Many of us feel very uncomfortable with the pause. What I'd like to suggest is your experience as a communicator's view of the pause is different than the audience's. A pause allows the audience to catch up, to rest, to formulate thoughts. If you think about it, as I'm speaking, you are following me. And at some point, if I pause, you catch up, and there's a sense of completion, of connection. If I just keep talking and never stop and you're chasing me, it's exhausting. It's exhausting. We've all heard people who just ramble on and never stop. And you're like, oh, this is awful. Now, there's some other things you can do to buy yourself time to think besides pausing. And it's okay to say, let me think for a moment. That's okay. And the moment might feel longer to you than it does to the audience. You can ask clarifying questions. So when somebody asks you a question or you need to respond, you could ask a clarifying question to buy you time. You can also paraphrase. I am a huge proponent of paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is not where you repeat word for word what somebody has said. Paraphrasing is where you extract some key point or something that's really important and you comment on it. Paraphrasing and follow-up questioning are actually lower order cognitive skills. What the heck does that mean? It means we don't have to think as much to do those things. So I can paraphrase what you're saying and begin to think about my answer simultaneously. So it's not just, do I pause or not pause? It might be to buy time, I ask a clarifying question, or I paraphrase, and those can help me.
Wow. I think that's, thank you. That's great. That is helpful to me. I gotta believe that's helpful to a lot of people. Tim will tell you I'm terrible at the pause. I will.
Horrible.
It did not take Tim any pausing to say horrible. I think that's interesting. There's no pause.
Jerry, I don't know if you're going to cover it, but Matt, not only is there so much power behind the pause, like you mentioned, but putting a deliberate pause in there like that to allow the other person to respond. And then you're having a two-way conversation. It's not like you said, you're not going and running off the mouth and not engaging, because if you're pausing and letting someone speak, you're letting, like you said, you give them a chance to digest what you just said, and then they get to respond, and then hopefully you're listening, and then you respond. There isn't too many people I can talk to where I get that. And it is, I still struggle with it, but it is, and it's refreshing when you talk to someone and you can get that. I have another question. I'm going to pause for you, that I definitely want to ask you, but yeah, your thoughts just on that.
Yeah. So one of the best ways to connect with somebody and build trust is to listen well. And we can't listen and speak simultaneously. So there has to be silence and there has to be digesting of the information. So somebody who pauses, allowing you to formulate your thoughts and to respond, is really giving you a gift in that moment. And pausing is really powerful. And pausing is ceding the floor to somebody else to allow them to continue. And that's a really, really generous offer. I learned this from a former NPR reporter. I also teach with her. Her name is Deborah Schifrin. And she said what really helped her in her interviews is when she would pause after somebody else was done. And she said in that magic moment or moments, people would then open up more because they felt like they had the invitation to do so. So pausing is a great way to get people to connect, to offer them an opportunity to say more. And I really think it is a gift. It is awkward, but you can learn to do it comfortably.
There's a pause right there.
I liked it. I saw what you were doing. Yeah. At least you kept moving, because had you frozen, I would have thought, uh-oh, my system crapped out on me.
That's funny. So actually that kind of leads me into another topic that I wanted to discuss is you mentioned that in the, I think it was either in a, I don't remember where I read it, either podcast or maybe it's in the book, but you talk about small talk and really how the pandemic has kind of messed with small talk in a way, like we aren't good at it, or we aren't as good as we used to be. And then you even talked in this about the Zoom meetings and about the kind of the way we're communicating. I don't know. Some people are being called back to work, others not. I'm not sure how this is all going to play out, but it seems to me that we need help in understanding how to better, I guess, create what we used to have when it comes to small talk in a Zoom meeting, and then maybe outside of the Zoom meeting or something, because it seems like the only time I'm talking with people is when I'm in a 20 person or a 10 person or even just a 3 or 4 person meeting, but that doesn't lend itself really to small talk. And within 2 minutes somebody will be like, well, hey, we need to get this meeting started, and it's like, well, but we were enjoying the small talk. So what's your thoughts there?
So there are a lot of things I could say. So small talk gets a bad rap, first and foremost. I would love to rebrand small talk. Small talk is actually a very valuable form of communication. It's not small at all. Big things are happening in small talk. And we need to recognize what those things are. So small talk allows us to connect with other people. It allows us to explore similarities, differences, get interesting new ideas. We find collaborations, we find similarity, we find difference. All of these are very informative and useful. When it comes to virtual communication, the goal is not to replicate, well, let me say it this way. Not everything that we do in person should be replicated virtually. A colleague of mine, somebody I've also interviewed on the podcast, his name's Jonathan Lavav, and he's done some work on this whole transition to virtual communication. And one of the things that he shared with me is the goal is not to replicate what we have when we're in person. The goal is to figure out what's the underlying principle or activity that's being accomplished, and then figure out how can you do it virtually. So, for example, when we meet people in person, we shake hands, maybe we give a hug. In certain cultures, they give a bow. That's serving to connect with somebody. It's very hard to do that virtually. I can't shake your hand. I could bow, I guess. But could we find another way of acknowledging the other person's presence and connecting through the technology that fulfills the same obligation? And the answer is yes. And organizations have come up with lots of interesting ways that people greet themselves. So when it comes to small talk, we have to think again, what is small talk doing? And how are there ways that I can accomplish those goals given the tools that I have? Could I build something into the chat? Could I build something into the use of the way people's names are? In Zoom, for example, most of the tools, you can change how your name appears, right? We could change our name. In fact, I have 2 teenage boys. This is one of these parenting moments where your kids do something that's blatantly wrong, but amazingly genius. And it's hard as a parent to sort of scold, but be like, oh man, I wish I would have thought of that. So one of my kids said, one of the things that they and their fellow students do, and this was back in the pandemic Zoom school, is they'll change their name to be connecting ... and they just won't move and stare at the screen, and the teacher never called on them. And I'm thinking, that's genius, and you should never do that, right? So that's a tangent. But the point is there a way that we could connect with each other, share information, essentially fulfill small talk obligation using this tool? So for example, could I start off the meeting posing a couple questions and you change your name to reflect your answer in to one of those questions, and then all of a sudden we're connected in a certain way? So I could say, how many people eat breakfast for dinner, and change your name to reflect what you eat. And Jerry and I could both put cereal and Tim puts pancakes. All of a sudden, we just learned something interesting about each other, something we might do in small talk that allows us to be connected. So my point is this: it is hard. You have to make a conscious effort. Good things come from small talk. Can we leverage technology and what it affords us or takes away from us to accomplish those same goals? Are we pausing extra long for effect?
Just a fun fact about Zoom. The beginning of August, they officially started calling back a majority of their workforce back into the office if you work within 50 miles of one of their home offices, which is so awesome. It's such a contradiction. You're in the business of providing a virtual channel, right, for people to connect, and now you're pulling your employees back in.
So as somebody who teaches strategic communication, I find that fascinating. And we I think we're going to use that as a case in my class to really talk about how do you do that, right? I mean, it affects your brand, it affects everything, but by not calling people back, well, let me put it this way. It appears that they found that their business would be better off to publicly cause that disconnection that you're talking about. So I find that interesting from a strategic communication point of view. I literally live 15 minutes from Zoom's galactic headquarters. And so it's interesting to just think, and I know many people who work there. It's interesting to think about how they did that.
Yeah, that to me is just a, I don't even know. Like, did the marketing department talk to the HR department before they made these decisions? That seems like a really bad one.
I am sure there was very intense conversation.
Yeah.
But dang, that had to be a really intense conversation, and somebody had to weigh in and just be like, "Look, we're losing X by doing this." I mean, even and have to do it publicly. That just really shocked me, that one. Yeah. All right. Well, I think the only other question I had, we talk about jargon and not using jargon, but in IT, sometimes using jargon is almost your social status in a way, right? Like the ability to use jargon and talk to each other in leveraging that. And then at the same time, you get a business person in the meeting who doesn't understand the jargon, and everything gets kind of wonky. Any quick solves on how much to use, how little to use, a better way to do it?
So I totally agree with you that if you're talking to somebody who is really trying to, if you're talking to somebody who you are very confident has a vernacular, a lexicon that is similar to yours, it provides a shorthand and it allows you to communicate more efficiently, more quickly. And in some ways, it's a lot more fun to talk with somebody. We all remember being kids coming up with our own little language that we thought was fun, that was shorthand. There is value that comes from that. The problem is if others don't have the full understanding, have the full decoder ring, then it becomes really challenging. And so, again, it boils down to know your audience. Maybe you define a bunch of terms at the beginning of the meeting and then you jump in. Again, and then the last thing I'll say is it gets back to strategic communication. By using vocabulary that is unique and highly specialized, it does give you a special status in the moment. And you have to weigh, is that status, and it was being perceived as having that status, more important than making sure everybody understands clearly what you're saying. And there are times, certainly I think that's true. And there are times where I think it actually works against you. So you have to make that calculation. I say something very similar to people who race through their content. Their goal is just to get through their content. And my point is, it's not about getting through the content. It's, did anybody understand and learn and benefit from what you said? Right. And so the same thing in this case is the benefit of using this vernacular that only a few people know. Does it outweigh people actually understanding what the heck you're saying? And there could be cases where that's the case, but I don't think so. So it's about knowing your audience and really thinking strategically about what it's about.
All right. Well, thank you very much for being with us here today. Special thanks to my fellow misfit, Tim Stevens, and of course, to our esteemed guest, Matt Abrams. Really appreciate you being here on the show with us, sir. And again, just please, the book, when does the book come out? It's this month, right? Or is it already
The book comes out September 26th. It's called Think Faster, Talk Smarter. It's all about how to speak better in the moment.
And boy, does it do a great job at it. And it gives you those quick implementation methods that are really, really valuable. So it's not just a book that you read and kind of go, I don't know, I didn't get much out of it. You will absolutely get something out of it by reading it. I think all of us can use that. And again, thank you so much for being here. Everyone, have a wonderful day.